Dawkins, and my co-hosts are Dixie Cochran.
Hello.
And Eddie Webb.
Hello.
And today we are going to be discussing Mage the Ascension, or I should be saying I am going to be discussing Mage the Ascension with noted guest Satyros Phil Brucato, developer of Mage the Ascension 20th Anniversary Edition and many Mage the Ascension books before this edition.
Wait, Matthew, you're gonna leave us?
Yeah.
You're not gonna take one of us with you?
I considered it, but this life raft only has room for two, and I've reserved a space for our guest, and as I'm the man with the oars, I'm afraid it's just me and him. Don't know where that metaphor was going.
Wait. Did you just imply you're gonna leave us? You just imply you're gonna leave us here to die?
Depends on how well you can swim and resist the freezing temperatures of the North Sea. I don't know, again, I don't know where this metaphor is going. Why are we in the North Sea? Has a U-boat sunk our ship? Is it 1943? And why are two Americans on a ship in the North Sea at this time? I don't know. Maybe we'll find out in the interview.
I think we're starting off on an appropriately bleak way for this particular interview.
I mean, it's not bleak so much, I don't think.
Leaving us to die is pretty bleak, at least from my perspective.
No, that's bleak. The interview itself may or may not be bleak. I mean, full disclosure, the interview has already happened. Eddie and I have listened to it. It's not so much a bleak, but folks who listen to this regularly, it is a lot darker and touches on some more sensitive topics than most of our interviews. I think something that Eddie's going to be time-stamping in the show notes.
Yeah, there are a couple of content warnings. Phil pretty opened up about his personal struggles with abuse and some of his friends' struggles with abuse and rape. So I've been putting timestamps for those particular discussions.
Is because one of the books we discuss in this upcoming interview is Book of the Fallen, which is a Mage the Ascension source book, which is currently under development. And Book of the Fallen does deal with some pretty horrific topics in a role-playing context and a real-world context as well, because something Phil is particularly passionate about is handling horror and the nature of evil maturely. We do go into it, as mentioned, in a little bit of detail in this interview. So if that's not the kind of thing you're interested in hearing about, then by all means, know your limits, switch off, or skip those parts. No judgment from us. And we won't be making light of the subject that we're dealing with dark and mature content in this interview. And we also cover the 20th Anniversary Edition book in general, as well as Book of the Fallen. So there's an awful lot to love here if you're a Mage fan, or if you're just interested in Mage. Because one of the things I've often found with Mage is it's a game that can be a difficult one to access as a new gamer. So by all means, avoid the content you dislike. As mentioned, we will timestamp it, but there will be content that is well suited to someone who is brand new to the Mage train and wants to hop on board. Welcome back, everybody. You join me with the one, the only Satyros Phil Brucato.
Hey, Matthew. Hello, everybody.
Hello, Satyr. This is a rather exciting interview for me because way back when I was quite prolific on YouTube with my Gentleman Gamer channel, I was running the gauntlet of old White Wolf developers, not old in age, of course, or at least not old in spirit. But I never got around to my Mage the Ascension deep dive, and so now is the time, I guess.
Excellent. Well, thank you, and thank you very much for having me on. I appreciate it.
And just to explain the relationship right now from an organizational standpoint, an Onyx Path standpoint, with me as the line developer for World of Darkness, and Phil Satyr as the developer for Mage the Ascension. We both get to look at the excellent work that's coming through for Mage 20, and hopefully, with a bit of luck, in a couple of years, Mage 5th edition, if Onyx Path is able to wrangle some of that. But Satyr will develop the books with his team of writers, and he will therefore instruct them, but via outline and via direction throughout the course of book production, what kind of content is required for this Mage book in question. Once he feels it's up to standard, usually following a red lines process and final drafts being submitted, he will develop them to a finished quality, send them to me. I'll give the book a review, and if I find anything particularly flagrant that needs addressing, I will mention it to him. But for the most part, it's a case of me ticking boxes and sending it on to White Wolf, or at the very least editing and art for approval at that point. Anything on that process that you want to add I've missed out on?
I tend to do a lot of writing on these books. I always have, and especially since we started working on Mage 20, I've done the majority of the writing. In some cases, like the Book of Secrets, and how do you do that? All of it.
And how do you? Okay, so this is an interesting question, because this is a slightly out of off the norm for a lot of our development. And that is where the writer and developer are one and the same. One could ask, how do you remain impartial when it comes to your own work? With the old "kill your darlings" ethos, if you're writing all of this material, how do you know which parts to take the hatchet to?
Well, to start with, I always maintain a brain trust of several dozen people who I trust and respect to give me honest feedback. And throughout the process of working on a project, whatever that project may be, I toss bits of it and ideas and chapters and excerpts and so forth to my brain trust and say, okay, does anybody notice something I'm not that I'm missing here? And the way that I put it to them is, I would rather hear. If I'm making a mistake, if I'm screwing something up, I'd rather hear about it from my friends when I can fix it than from strangers when it's too late. So every book that I have worked on for the last 20 years or so has had that sort of oversight from various people, and that has helped me avoid a lot of things. And part of it also is just, I've been doing this a long time. I've been writing professionally for 30 years as of next year, and I've had a lot of really good editors, and especially back in the early days when I first started with White Wolf, I would sit down after every project with my editors, particularly Rob Hatch, Brian Campbell, and Cynthia Summers, and say, okay, where did I screw up and what can I do better next time? So I've not only cultivated a very good critical eye, I've cultivated a very good critical eye for my own flaws. And you need a certain amount of ego to do this sort of thing. I mean, you can't work at all in a creative field for any length of time if you don't have a belief and a confidence that your work is good. But my belief is that the work can always be better, and I'm always, both while I'm writing and after I do the first pass of writing, when I print it out, I'm constantly asking myself, if I'd bought this book instead of having written this book, what would I feel that I needed? Now, the sort of downside to this is it frequently, well, actually always, leads to books that are longer than had been originally planned. Because when I'm
Oh yes. We were discussing this just before we started recording.
Yeah. And when I'm working on that part, I'm always saying, if I had paid money for this, what would I feel like I needed to see? Now, obviously, I can't provide everything. No book could do that. Mage 20 could easily have been twice the 500,000 words that it is, and still not touched on everything that a person might conceivably have wanted from it. But when I get working and as I continue working, I'm shaping a vision of, what do I need this book to be? What do I expect from this book, and how will a reader, how will a customer feel it when they see this book? Does the material in here, one, support the vision, two, support the need of the product and the need of the consumer? And I know that to some people it probably sounds like anathema that I refer to these things as product. But they have to be, because that's what this is. I am very much an artist, but I'm also a business person. I've been a publisher myself. Actually, still am a publisher myself when I can get a chance to work on my own stuff. and occasionally publish other people as well. But there is the art and there is the business. And when I'm working, whether it's working for myself or working for a client, I'm always keeping both of those things in mind.
So that spawns a few interesting questions all of their own. So going back to the brain trust initially, is there anyone in that group, because you've used this group or a group like it for many years, your sounding board, I guess? Have you ever which members of this brain trust, I guess, are your permanent council? The ones you always go to, you've been going to for years now, and I guess to give them a little bit of a shout out, who would you say gives you at times the most critical feedback but the most valuable?
Well, my first my first and at this point longest collaborator in that regard is my wife, Sandra Swan. We have been together inseparably together for almost actually over 11 years at this point.
Congratulations!
And one of the first things, thank you. One of the first things that we realized shortly after we got together is we worked together extremely well. We almost never argue about anything in terms of most things, but especially in terms of creative work. And, if we have a dispute, most times she's right. And I learned to respect her insight and feedback a long time ago. And so now I just pretty much listen to it. We don't always agree on everything, but she is definitely the number one person in my brain trust. There's my best friend, Inky Girl. That is her pretty much her legal name at this point. She and I have been friends for 15, going on 15 years now, and we're housemates at one point. She and I have been. She's been. We've been collaborating on both the brain trust element, and she's also modeled for and inspired characters in a number of my other books. She's the model on the cover of Power Chords, for instance. Power Chords, Music, Magic, and Urban Fantasy is one of my books. And Inky's motto is "No shit, there I was." She's been through a lot of she's been through a lot of stuff, and so she always gives me good feedback. There's my one of my very close friends and kind of my brother from another mother, Anthony Galatis, who is pretty much not a creative collaborator as well. He's been in several Mage books now and has become one of my go-to writers. But he's also a very, very close friend and somebody I respect very highly, both as a person, as an artist, and as someone who will give me honest feedback, both pro and con. His friend and collaborator Adelante, and I'm sorry, I don't want to screw up mispronouncing her last name because it's an interesting last name, but it's Greek, and I don't want to screw it up.
Yeah, that can always be problematic for us with less cultured tongues.
Yeah. But Adelante gave me a lot of good feedback on the Book of the Book of the Fallen, and two of my longtime. Well, there's also I want to add before I get to them, but Shane Wolf, who is one of the moderators on the Mage White Wolf group, or the Mage Facebook group rather. He's also a very, very good friend, trusted friend, and trusted giver of input. Again, both pro and con. He's one of the people who he says something, I listen. And two of my primary collaborators who unfortunately are no longer with us, Coyote Ashley Ward, my long-term girlfriend who died of cancer in November, and who had been collaborating with me creatively since World of Darkness Changing Breeds back about 12 years ago, and Raven Bond, who died the same week of a heart attack. He and I had been friends for about 10 years, and we'd both been, although we had not collaborated one-on-one, we'd been giving feedback to one another, both personally and professionally, for a long time. And it's going to be difficult doing the brain trust in the future without
No,
them.
I remember when these tragedies were hitting you, because we're friends on Facebook, we're on the same email lists, and I remember one thing after the other, and I can only imagine that must have knocked you for six, as we often say.
It was hard, and they're not the only people who died within the last year that have been close to me. They're just the two closest, and especially having them both in the same week. And there's someone else I want to mention before we move on is Kevin Weeks, who has been a very, very good source of feedback, and has been carrying the Mage torch very, very high on various different groups as well, and has kind of been almost speaking for me with my approval at times on the Mage Facebook group. He's also a good friend, and again, when he speaks, I listen.
Well, no, thank you for doing that, because I always think it's a valuable thing to pay it back to if you're getting counsel, or even to the writers who are doing you proud on every project, to occasionally shout out to them. It uplifts them, it promotes them, and they deserve the thanks, because this isn't a job you can do in a vacuum very effectively. It doesn't matter what book you're working on, whether it's for Mage or any other RPG. With RPGs being collaborative by nature, at one view of a subject is not the only view of a subject. So I've seen how effective your brain trust is at working on Gods and Monsters, on Book of the Fallen. I'll be looking forward to seeing how they work on Technocracy as well. And we'll get onto those projects soon. But I wanted to touch on something else that you mentioned, and that's that with excellent editors, you've been able to refine your process. You've been able to identify, I guess, your strengths and weaknesses as a writer and a developer. And I guess this is the advice column bit, but let's say you have a new writer or a new developer that comes to you, and they want the 3 sage pieces of advice from you that you've learned. As you say, you've been writing these games for 30 years now, so you've certainly got the wisdom. One would hope.
Of course. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, the first law of media, no matter what medium it is you're working in, is keep your audience engaged. That is absolutely critical, especially now with media all around us, everywhere, that if you're taking a long time to get to a point, if you're info dumping on your audience, if you're droning on and on and on, you will lose your audience, or at least a large portion of them. People are not, reading your stuff out of a sense of boredom in their daily lives, because you have to try really, really hard to be bored these days. So you always keep your audience engaged, no matter what you're doing. One of a characteristic, I guess you could say, of one of my writing is that I tend to write very, well, let's say purple. It's very exuberantly dynamic. I have various different voices, but almost all of them are constantly I make dynamic choices. That's something from my acting days, as my acting teacher used to tell us. Always make dynamic choices to keep your audience hooked. So I need to cut back occasionally on my purple, but most times that profanely declamatory epic style is absolutely intentional, because it has to be, because it's an engaging characteristic, and it works for some people, it doesn't work for other people. But it's a deliberate characteristic of my work.
It's a particularly I guess pertinent choice for Mage, because saying it's a dynamic choice to write in that way and to have characters presented in that way. But Mage is very much a game of dynamic choices. You're often faced against great odds, and the question is, do you unleash your full power and accept the consequences for doing so in an effort to maybe save yourself or your loved ones, or do you take the subtle route and It's a game where flight, where escape, where using all your little arcane tricks to hide away isn't necessarily the worst idea in the world, because there's an awful lot that wants to keep you down under its heel.
Mm-hmm. Very true. And also, Mage deals with so many complex concepts and so much esoterica that we weren't constantly keeping it dynamic and passionate and personal, that it would become droning and arcane and impossible to read, really. Anyone who's ever tried reading, say, Israel Regardie or Aleister Crowley knows just how oblique this sort of thing can get. And I don't want to drone, and I don't want anyone else to drone in Mage, because if you drone, you lose your audience. And so even when explaining things like thought forms, egregores, when explaining as I do in the Book of the Fallen, going into 15,000 words on the Qliphoth, you have to keep that dynamic, otherwise it's snore-inducing.
Well, let's talk.
I don't want that.
Let's talk a little about that, because Mage 20. Let's call it as it is. And you mentioned it's a big book. It's
God, yes.
In fact, let's refer to it as a massive tome, because Mage is a massive tome. Now, that, in a sense, draws a little bit of criticism, because people may look at it and think, well, I'm never going to be able to access a book of this size. They may be daunted by its impressiveness. They may think there's too many options, be given choice paralysis, as it were. What is your advice to the prospective player or storyteller who wants to approach Mage 20? Do you guide them to a specific chapter, or what would you say to someone who wants to get into Mage?
Get the Mage quick start.
Actually, it's very good. Yeah.
Thank you. That's Mage 20 in 25,000 words or less.
And often the best way. We found that also with Wraith 20 recently, the handbook for the recently deceased that came out this year. It's been very popular because Wraith is another game that deals with some very heavy subject matter, as is well known. And that can be daunting to new readers immediately. But the handbook for the recently deceased, which Rich Dansky wrote for us, covers those broad topics in focused detail in a small handbook. So I think quick starts are probably the way forward for a lot of our games.
Yeah. In terms of Mage 20 itself, I would just recommend people check out Chapter 1. The way that I did Mage 20, and I did this to make it in part more accessible, and in part because Mage is filled with a ton of heavy and esoteric concepts and a really epic setting. I broke it down into several chapters at the beginning of the book that introduce the world through the eyes of people who are in it. It's written in a meta form, which you can read it as either me, the author and developer, talking to you, the reader, about it, or can be seen as a mage talking to an elder mage talking to a younger mage about this is what this is, look at this is what this is. Chapter 1 covers what is a mage in these terms, and what is the path of the mage. Chapter 2 covers what is magic in Mage. Chapter 3 covers what is the mundane world of Mage. Chapter 4 covers, okay, when you get into the other worlds and start dealing with all of these realms and zones and things like that, what does that look like? And Chapter 5 deals with, okay, so who are all the people, who are the parties, what's the history behind this setting? And you don't really get into rules until Chapter 6. By that point, between Chapters 1 and 5, you've been immersed in the setting. The rest of the book from that point takes that setting, takes those concepts that have been introduced in the earlier chapters, and says, okay, here's how you play this. And so that would be the kind of the introduction there. But the easiest way to approach Mage is simply to realize you don't need the epic setting. You don't need to know all the super metaphysics. You don't need to puzzle out what every sphere at every level can do. Just remember it's a book, and a game about empowering yourself in a world in which other people are doing the same, and asking yourself, if I woke up tomorrow with godlike powers, what would that do with me? What would that do to me, and what would I do with that? And realizing that the world that you create is also the world that creates you in return. That there are results and consequences for everything, and nothing happens in a vacuum.
And that's where the horror arises, because although Mage is an urban fantasy game, you could argue first and foremost, there's a very real horror to wielding that kind of power, to having it and not understanding it, and to be in a world where there's several other individuals probably in your city alone who can alter fate, or at least believe they can, for those mundane sleepers among you.
Yeah, and right there, that concept, and I get into that in Gods and Monsters, and as well as in Book of the Fallen, that idea that people, when they become mages, frequently start thinking of other human beings as the sleepers and the masses, and that sort of thinking leads to horrible things. It leads to excesses on the part of every group, and it can lead those mages to become monsters, and frequently does.
Well, and that's why you find, and I know you sometimes despair at the idea that there's a fair contingent of the fan base who sympathises with the Technocratic Union. Because, of course, for anyone who isn't familiar with Mage the Ascension, thank you very much for listening, first of all, but the Technocracy is, I guess, at least presented now as the alternate player faction. To put it
or
simply.
a alternative. I mean, we've also got the disparates, but yes, I never liked the idea of the big bad evil soulless monolith technocracy of Mage First Edition, and so with Brian Campbell and Judith McLaughlin, we began subverting that idea and saying, well, these are people who have a lot of really valid ideas. They just tend to take them too far. But at the same time, the traditions do as well. The people I despair of are the people who like playing Nefandi, and you're in the middle of developing my answer to that.
Yes, I am currently working my way through Book of the Fallen and alternating between shocked silence and not really knowing what to do with myself. It is. I'm not actually exaggerating, by the way. I have read an awful lot of horror tomes, both for World of Darkness and Chronicles of Darkness, and for Cult Divinity Lost, of course. I've worked on that too. Book of the Fallen does deal with some rather upsetting material. And I don't say that to be grandiose or braggadocious or anything like that. I'm not saying, look at this, ha ha ha, it's disgusting. My suggestion is, and this book should be out in the first part of next year, I imagine, because we just need to get the art and editing done on it this year, is that it's going to, without doubt, be for mature audiences only. And even then, I strongly suggest that people who want to read this book find out about its contents before they embark upon opening it up. It's the material within is handled very sensitively, so kudos to you, Satyr, and to your co-author Jacqueline Brick, who has written similar material for Changing the Lost, for Cult, and for Vampire 5th Edition.
Yeah, it was her work on Cult that convinced me. This was a book for a lot of reasons, which I get into in the Book of the Fallen itself. For a lot of reasons, this was a book I absolutely did not trust anybody else to write. And then Jax and I were talking, and she sent me. I don't remember if she sent me or if I had asked her to send me the material from Cult. I think it was that I asked her about it, and she sent it to me. And
you asked her because she then asked me whether she would be allowed to, because I developed the book for that material. So.
And the way she handled the material in Cult, I said, "Yep, okay, you're hired." As I told her a few days ago, when she was needing some affirmation after some particularly rough emotional stuff, I said, "I trusted you with something that I did not trust anyone else with, and you aced it." That's big. from me.
No, yeah, Jax. No, Jack. I know this is a bit of a love-in, but Jax is a fantastic writer. She knows her subject material, and it's wonderful to meet any writer who has a specialization. While she can write broadly across any number of subjects, Jax is a master at handling trauma in role-playing games and horrific subject matter that most games would not be able to handle with the sensitivity required.
Yeah, and that's we were talking a little while ago about Inky, about my best friend, and one of the reasons that she has been very, very helpful with my work in terms of her input is she's been through a lot of stuff. And she, in spite of all the things she has been through, she is a really amazingly good, generous human being. And she wears she wears a very, sometimes literally spiky exterior, as Jax does as well. But that's underneath that spiky exterior, if she trusts you, is this just amazingly loving human being. And so when I'm dealing with material that is, that's dealing with that level of real life brutality, I bounce it off her and I go, is this too much? Is this too far? I mean, you've read the prelude, and I don't want to talk about the prelude in this interview because, well, plenty of people talk about it when the book comes out. but she was the first.
I think if reading the prelude and you don't want to go any further, that's absolutely fine. That is your litmus test for this book. But sorry, do carry on.
Oh, Inky was the first person I ran it past. First as the idea, and then as the piece itself. And she had a few minor suggestions, which I incorporated. But her response was, "That's brutal, that hurts, and that's exactly what it needs." And then I ran it past a number of other people. There was one guy in my brain trust who couldn't make it. As he said, I cannot bring myself to read that prelude a second time because I suspect it probably hit really close to home for him. But the others, particularly the women in the brain trust, were like, "That's what this book needs." That prelude is going to be extremely controversial. I've been bracing for impact since I came up with the idea, but I ran it past my whole brain trust, and they were like, "Yeah, that sets the tone." And the tone, this is one of the few. Well, sorry, go ahead.
No, I've got a question for that then, because some games, hell, I'll speak openly about it. V5, which I've worked on, was criticised in some cases for causing controversy. There's other games by other companies that are criticised for the same thing. So, knowing you and knowing that you're not writing for the sake of controversy, what would you say your justification is for writing subject matter as extreme, as potentially traumatic as this? What is the utilization of it in role-playing games? And I guess, is it worth it? Is it worth the risk of doing it?
Well, and people will see this as well. This book has a preface and an afterword, which I sometimes put in afterwards, but this is the first time in my game writing that I put in an author's preface. And the preface, the title of the preface is "Evil is Not a Toy," and in that 1,000 words or so, I go through some experiences that I've had in my own life, and I say, this shit is serious. This isn't. We definitely, Mage is a game, but some of the things that we deal with in both in the subject matter and when we talk about evil are not. They're not play. They're not toy. I've said this. One of the reasons why I refuse even now to do an Effendi player's guide is simply because I've known people who practice black magic. And I've seen the results that it has on them and the people around them. And when you're dealing with role-playing games, you're always vicariously saying, "Okay, I'm going to become this whatever." But people don't become superpowered corpses. With a secret masquerade. People don't become 9-foot tall killing machines for the Earth Mother. people do practice black magic, and whether or not one believes that that demons are real or gods are real or that magic has real world effects, the things that those people do have psychological effects, and I've seen and I've felt and I've witnessed the damage that does, and I don't ever want people to think this is cool. There are definitely shadows to play with, and one of the things that I go into a lot in the book of the Fallen is the shadow from a Jungian standpoint, and the pros and cons of playing with the shadow, and that's part of what Jack's worked on as well. But in terms of people just going, I want to play an evil character, mwahaha, I'm like, do you really? This is what that actually looks like. It doesn't look like throwing black flames and chanting, hail, hail to the Dark Lord. It looks like horrific things. Not horrific in a neat way, but horrific in painful ways, because those painful ways have a human cost. One of the things that people, when they see the preface, may notice is that the preface isn't, not the preface, rather, the prelude of the story is told from the person on the receiving end of horrific abuse. And their abuser is telling them, this is why I'm doing this to you. But what the reader is getting is, this hurts. And that's what I want. I'm not doing this book because I want to hurt people. I'm doing this book because I see people doing these things and thinking that's okay, and it's not. Going back to Inky and some of her experiences, when she was living with Sandy and I, she came home very shaken one night from gaming with her boyfriend and her then boyfriend and some of his friends, and it turned out, as she told us, that the GM, who was not her then boyfriend, but he had her character drugged, raped, and impregnated with a demon baby. Now, this is a rape survivor. She's very open about that. This is someone who has been sexually abused several times in her life, and she goes to a game with her boyfriend, and his friend has her vicariously raped and impregnated. That's not okay. I was furious. I tore strips off of everyone involved. But that sort of thing happens all the time. Talk to any woman gamer, and she can tell you about how many times her characters have been raped by guys who thought, oh, well, it's just a game. And so that's a big theme in this book. Both the rape is a theme in this book, abuse is a theme in this book, and more to the point, the idea that doing that is not okay and that it has a human cost is a big theme in this book. And there are going to be people who are going to go, as some have, blah, 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 Brucato, social justice warrior, blah, blah, brainwashed by the feminazis. Fuck that. No. I've been raped. I've been abused. I've been hurt by people. And it's not okay. The anger in that book, and probably the anger in the tone of my voice right now, is genuine. It doesn't come because I read about things on Facebook. It's because some of this shit has happened to me. And it's not okay to vicariously tell people that's okay, that it's all right to play that because it's just a game. It's more than that. And that's what a lot of the rage in this book comes from, is the idea that people take that and people will argue and have vociferously argued that anyone having a problem with that is just some, social justice, blah, 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 whatever. No. I love RPGs. I love writing them. I love playing them. And I also recognize that role-playing vicariously engages your true self. It's not real. It's all imaginary, yeah. But there is a certain psychic reality aspecting something I've written about. That's a whole other tangent. I'm not going to go off on that right now. But there is still a certain emotional kind of psychological reality to what we do in RPGs, and it can be a lot of fun and it can be healing, but it can hurt. And what this book says, I think, more than anything else, or at least it's what it's intended to say, is don't hurt people.
I think it is a superb book for exactly that message. And you're right, there will be people.
Thank you.
And I always find it unpleasant because when V5 came out and I had hired Jax to write the mature play guidelines for that book. And there were, of course, people who were already primed to go after the book for various faults and foibles, whether it's mechanical, whether it's setting, or a combination.
Whether it's people working on it,
or after,
whether it's
after the individuals working on it, and in a way that's fine. That kind of criticism I expect with any new edition of a game, and that isn't me trying to dumb down the importance of said criticism, because sometimes that criticism can be incredibly valid and incredibly useful for future releases. But the criticism that does irritate me, I guess, more than anything else, is when people attack books that are trying to handle this mature subject matter seriously, like Book of the Fallen, and indeed with the mature content guidelines in V5, because there'll be people who say, well, anyone who abides by this is weak or isn't playing properly, or for God's sake, it's only a role-playing game. We've been able to play these games for decades and have never needed these before. So why are you now trying to force your partial judgments off on us? And, that's all well and good. But there are plenty of people who haven't been able to play role-playing games because these kind of boundaries, these kind of guidelines aren't in place. And having them there as guidelines isn't stopping anyone from playing. It's just enabling more people to play in a more comfortable environment. And while not every single game has to be a raucous, laugh-out-loud fun fest, and indeed most World of Darkness and Chronicles of Darkness games aren't, that doesn't mean you can't handle said subject matter with the maturity it deserves. And so I've seen the exact same things you have, and I've obviously fallen into the trap occasionally of interacting with them, because you want to explain, no, these guidelines aren't here to clamp down on your fun and stop you from having fun. These guidelines are here to allow other people to feel comfortable in our hobby. We're a very small niche in the world, and if we can get more people into it by making it a safer place to play, then I personally think that's fantastic, both from an ethical and a business sense, because it makes people happy and it makes people spend money. Sorry to sound a bit capitalist about it, but it's win-win for the people who are writing this kind of thing. And for me, reading through Book of the Fallen, yes, there is subject matter in there that will no doubt be seen as problematic by some people, and for good reason. It's painful subject matter. But at the same time, a book like Book of the Fallen exists so that you can handle this mature subject matter in a game of Mage, or indeed any other World of Darkness game, and do so without being gratuitous and exploitative and vulgar, whether to use a popular Mage the Ascension word.
Yeah, very true. Well, and it's not the material in there, the controversial material in there isn't presented in there to go, ha ha ha, look at me, I'm all edgy and shit. It's
not being lurid.
Yeah, it's going, so this actually happens, and that's something. There are sidebars in there about human trafficking. There are sections in there that deal with slavery, with modern slavery, with the chocolate plantation slavery, with mercenary armies that go and kill people for being inconvenient. These are all real. There's chapter 1 features a series of brutal gut punches about, here, let's take a look at this, let's take a look at this, let's take a look at this, let's take a look at this. Every single one of those examples is drawn from real life. That's not made up. The only thing invented about it is it wasn't necessarily happening on my street right now that I'm aware of. But the things that I'm talking about in that book, it's not four-color evil. And I address in that book the difference between comic book evil of nya ha ha, blood and souls from my dark lord, and the more realistic evil of the guy beating and raping his kids next door, which actually, and I talk about this in the preface, was actually happening to some friends of mine that literally lived next door to me when I lived in Hawaii in the 1970s. Their father was beating and raping them, and the idea that evil is that close, and that so many people turn a blind eye to it, is a primary theme in the Book of the Fallen, and that kind of evil doesn't look neat, it doesn't look cool, and it doesn't. I'm wearing a Baphomet hoodie right now, which I inherited actually from my friend Raven, but it doesn't look like a Baphomet hoodie. It looks like a respectable military officer who beats and rapes his kids, and that's what real evil really looks like. And I'm like I said, evil's not a toy. That's what it looks like, so I present it that way.
Well, I appreciate it. I have no doubt there's going to be an awful lot of fans that appreciate it too. And I'm going to, I guess, take this conversation into
lighter waters.
into shallower waters, maybe. One thing we were discussing was with the size of Mage 20, how it'd be daunting. And there's a little piece of advice I wanted to throw in here. And I mentioned it on one of the other episodes of the Onyx Pathcast, but specifically, the size of M20 for me is a positive boon. I see the book as almost more encyclopedic than something you would read from beginning to end. It's a grab bag, a toolbox, call it what you will.
Yeah.
But certainly, if you don't want to run a game that involves the Nefandi or the Marauders or the Technocracy, and you don't have to, there's plenty of mages that aren't a part of any of those factions. You don't need to. You don't need to read those sections, and the book is still a perfectly fantastic read, and the game is perfectly playable without it. But at the same time, if you want to approach Mage 20 from another vantage point, you can open it at a different chapter and have an entirely different game. You mentioned, I guess, looking at the planes, the grand vision of Mage. You don't need to go that far. It can be very much street level. And on that note, talking about street level, if you were to really boil down Mage and you were to run an introductory scenario for someone who was first coming to terms with Awakening and gaining access to their powers they may not understand, how would you go about telling that tale? What kind of roadblocks would you put in their place to make it feel like Mage?
Well, again, the Mage 20 Quick Start deals with that. Basically, I would say, what I would do if I were the storyteller is I would get rid of the traditions, get rid of the technocracy, get rid of the disparates and the Ascension War, the whole 9 yards. It's not that I'd throw them out entirely, but I wouldn't start with that. I'd start with people, because ultimately, no matter what faction a mage belongs to, mages are human beings. And so I would start with people who had no idea that any of these things existed, who were just beginning to learn that they had more power within their world than they thought. In the Mage 20 Quick Start, the characters given and the setting given are 5 homeless characters, based here in Seattle, and it's inspired by some people I actually know, and inspired by the unfortunately increasingly large homeless population here in Seattle and along the Pacific Northwest in general, where the housing has become so incredibly expensive that there are every parking lot you see has people living in cars and people living in RVs, and any overpass you drive through has tents and things like that set up under it, not because those people are losers, but because those people can't afford $2,000-$4,000 a month, even if they're working, to have a place to live. And there's the anger that drives my vision of Mage, but there's also that perspective of what happens if people who are in that position learn that they have the power to do something. And that's what the Mage 20 Quick Start deals with. 5 people who have, aside from one person who was briefly kind of brushed against the technocracy very early in his life and didn't realize it at the time, it's 5 people who are just trying to survive. and what their life is like, and what their obstacles and their friends and their companions and so forth look like in that world that is literally between the cracks of everybody else's daily life. That's where I'd start. I mean, I've had a lot of people ask me over the years if I were to do Mage from the ground up. As I've said in many interviews before, I inherited Mage, literally at this point. But when Mage First Edition was being written, I was a freelancer for White Wolf, but I wasn't on staff. I was hired once the first edition rulebook had been completed, and then when when I got to the office, Ken Cliff, my then boss, handed me the first copy to come back from press, and I said, how much leeway, how much creative freedom do I have with this? And he says, it's as long as you don't change any of the core concepts right off the bat, it's all yours. We don't have the slightest idea what to do with it. And that's kind of
it's on one hand, a blank slate like that is a field of wonder and dreams, and on the other, it's the most nightmarish task ahead of a new freelancer.
It's been a huge epic. For 25 years, that's been my life. Whether I've been actually working on Mage or whether I've just had people asking me about it, but the point of all of that, though, is people have asked me if I was there at day one, what would Mage look like? And I said, it wouldn't be nearly as cosmic. And I like the cosmic elements, the epic. I refer to it in Mage 20 as the intimate epic. The epic scope is fun, and it's great. And if you've got high level characters who want to go off and battle in the ruins of Doisatep with Nefandi riding Ramas Ka, that's perfectly okay. That's fun. But first and foremost, I'd start with, and they're people. And they're people just like us who have suddenly realized that their ability to change their world for better and worse is a lot bigger and a lot scarier and a lot more empowering than they thought it could be. That, to me, is the heart of Mage.
In a lot of ways, whenever I'm explaining Mage to new players, because I do a similar thing, I compare Mage most closely to Vampire in concept, in the sense that you are an outsider by your nature, and you are forced by what is not necessarily a curse, although it could certainly be construed as such, to live on the fringe, to know more than you probably should. Mm-hmm. Or more than the other people around you do. And whether you use that power for good or ill to benefit yourself, your loved ones, society, or to hide yourself away, build the best barriers you possibly can to lengthen your life, it's a very personal story. Mm-hmm. And traditions, as they exist in Mage, do make for fantastic sort of faction subsets, philosophies, political alignments, because naturally when you are already on the fringe, you gravitate toward other people like you. Mm-hmm. And this is why secret societies exist in our real world. People with a shared viewpoint cluster together. But first and foremost, you are a human with an unusual ability. And that can pose all kinds of challenges and opportunities to the average individual. Mm-hmm. But to take it to that more epic scale, I guess in our last 5-10 minutes, mm-hmm. we haven't really spoken much about gods and monsters. And mm-hmm. by the nature of its title, Gods and Monsters, you can tell that this is a game that can plumb the reaches of hell and ascend to the giddy heights of heaven. Mm-hmm. But we also have those mundane elements to it as well, don't we? When I was reading through it, of course, you have your hooligans, your cops, your robbers, your beggars on the street, your
salespeople, office workers,
exactly,
truck drivers,
but ranging all the way through to basically jinn and demons of varying cultures. And that's something I want to speak to you about as well. So firstly, what would your synopsis be for Gods and Monsters for anyone who hasn't looked into it?
It's a book of characters that range from mundane little children to literal gods. And it's a book about how both you can fit those characters into your game. You can drop those characters into any World of Darkness game, really. And it's also the final chapter of it deals with how to create those kinds of characters, again, ranging from, little children who have no powers to, the lower levels of when you get into true god forms, you're talking about entities that go beyond statistics, but it's how you can build companion characters, as opposed to just mages. But it's also innately beyond that. It's a book about how the things and the people that we see as strangers, or that we see as monsters, or maybe that we even recognize as familiar, that they're still people. I think that it was when the book was originally conceived, I was just going to dump a bunch of characters into it and call it good. And then in between the time that the book was originally conceived in 2012 and the time that we started writing it in 2016, I started working on it in 2015, and then we headed into 2016. I decided that it wasn't right for me. I didn't feel right about just writing all these characters myself, because I really wanted to have it be an expansive and diverse book, not just a bunch of things that a white-ish, dude-ish guy could come up with. I wanted to present a broader experience. And so I enlisted the help of my friends, my friends James Sobrano, Hirome Kota, and Isabella Price, because I said, there are stories in here, and there are people and experiences that are not mine to write. So I want you all to write them. And as we got started on that, the political situation was already starting to shift in ugly directions. I mean, it's been ugly on some levels for quite a while, but it was getting uglier and uglier. James, for instance, had been at Standing Rock, and Isabella is she's a Black American woman from Louisiana, and Hirome is a Japanese American military vet who has, he was in, I don't remember off the top of my head if it was Afghanistan or Iraq. May have actually been both, but he has done a lot of travel both in the Middle East and in Asia, as well as in Europe and the States, and obviously has a bigger perspective than any of the other authors, myself included. And so all of us, we were bringing that experience into the book, but as things got nastier politically, socially and politically, we got together in the beginning of 2017, and I said, this book can't just be a bunch of people and a bunch of monsters. This has to be about how we see each other. And so we scrapped most of what we had done and started over again, with the intention of doing a book that was about how we see, and frequently how we fear, one another, and how we can conceivably get past that by recognizing our shared humanity, even if we do look like monsters in one another's eyes. So that's the undercurrent theme in that book, is about fear of the other and transcending the fear of the other by recognizing that the other is us and we are the other. And putting humanity into it, even when you're talking about gods.
Well, there's very few among the plethora of entities within this book that can be described, I guess, as irredeemably corrupt, fallen, evil, or use whichever word you decide. But almost all of the gods and monsters you've written for it, you and your team, have some kind of, as you say, a human face, a personality. And what I particularly like about it, having done my sort of overdevelopment on it, is that, as you say, this is a book you could use theoretically for any World of Darkness game. With a bit of adaptation, you could use it for any Chronicles of Darkness game. And I'm a big fan of that kind of utility in a role-playing game product. It's the same thing we're going for with Shonda by the Moon for Wealth the Forsaken. So antagonists and supporting characters you could place anywhere. And I say this because I've run a lot of Dark Ages Vampire as well, or Vampire the Dark Ages if you prefer, that interacts with the mythical and sublime, and quite often Vampire is very grounded in gritty reality. Werewolf often comes up against other amazing creatures, often quite terrifying and horrible, but Mage the Ascension especially, because you have that sight, the ability to see what would normally be hidden from the average human, you are able to identify that it isn't just vampires, werewolves, mages, and ghosts and changelings that are walking around. There's all kinds of things from all kinds of cultures and backgrounds, ethnicities, and nations, both fallen and extant. And that, for me, is exciting as a reader, because I can look at this and I can treat it as a monster manual if I want, and I can, pluck one of these out and put it in my chronicle, or I can build a chronicle around it, or I can make the patrons of this bar this particular type of creature, and present it as natural. And it's for me, it's almost a similarity. I don't know how familiar you are, Phil, with the TV series Angel.
Oh yeah,
the spin-off of Buffy.
Oh yes.
And when he would head to the karaoke bar, and it would be full of demons and various creatures from various planes. But Gods and Monsters feels like that bar.
Thank you.
This is where your mage goes when they have just peeked behind the curtain and they think, "Oh wow, okay, this is a lot deeper than just me and my friends' traditions."
Thank you. It's funny. I hadn't really thought of it that way until you mentioned it, but yeah, and I will definitely take that as a compliment. Thank you.
Oh well, I'm glad you do. But on that merry note, I think you are going to have to drive someone somewhere, and that means we're going to have to call a close to our interview.
Okay. Thank you. Really appreciate it. It's always good talking with you, Matthew. And
let this not be the last time, because when Dixie is back with us, we will have to arrange another interview to discuss Victorian Age Mage and also delve into Technocracy Reloaded.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And to anyone out there who's still listening, thank you, one, for listening, and thank you for enjoying what we do. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Welcome back, everybody, and thank you very much for listening to the interview. Oh, yes, I forgot you were out at sea. Okay, I'm rowing. Unfortunately, I couldn't find help, so I have indeed saved you. Unfortunately, the boat is still only fit for two, because where was I going to find another boat?
Well, did you leave Phil on shore at least, so that one of us can get in the boat?
No, there had to be a sacrifice, and I was hungry. So, let's get to our recap. It's alright, he didn't have much more development to go. Let's do a recap of our interview. What do either of you have any thoughts on what was discussed? Dixie?
Well, I mean, since Book of the Fallen, obviously, I haven't read yet. I guess, based on some of our conversations, I kind of realized how heavy it was and how much it talked about kind of the nature of evil. But until hearing you and Phil, especially Phil, talk so passionately about it, I didn't realize how much it went into that. I don't know. I apparently can't talk anymore. I don't know what just happened. But the point is, I now kind of realize how incredibly kind of heavy that book is. I'm excited to read it, but also I didn't really know how much of Phil's personal, experiences were rooted in that, or anybody else's. I think it's really cool when a developer or a writer can bring that much of their life into a book, but it also is hard. I know we have a lot of writers who have brought various kind of traumatic histories into their books, and it's always kind of hard to read when you know that person has gone through those things. I feel that way about fiction authors too, where if you know someone has gone through something, it's difficult to read them writing about it sometimes, because you know how much is rooted in truth. Yeah. But it also makes it a little bit more powerful to me. rather than like if I wrote about some of the things that Phil's talking about that I haven't gone through, you know?
I know I kind of had a similar experience. I don't know how much we can talk about it, but Matthew asked me to work on a cult book, and part of it was because of my experiences living in an economically depressed area and just all the frustration and anger that comes from that experience. And it kind of to what Phil's point, I should say, is that when I was in a situation like, I just poured into it, and like, I was surprised how fast the word count got eaten up because it was just so much, a lot of me on the page. And then went back through and kind of tweaked it to fit the needs of the product. And some chunks actually completely rewrote it. But I mean, it was a weirdly cathartic experience. And also it was the most nervous I'd ever been about Red Lines in a while because it was almost inadvertently so much of me on that page. So I can certainly respect Phil's idea of, he wasn't really sure if anybody else should be involved in that.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I read and consume in general pretty kind of gross horror media fairly often. Like I watch a lot of things that people have warned me to not watch. Like I recently started watching Black Mirror, and there were a million people who were going like, "Don't start with the first episode, don't do that." And I was like, "Well, I'm just gonna watch it in order." And I did, and I didn't, lose my mind or have to like turn it off or whatever. Like I've made it through the first 3 seasons now, watching them in order. So I've got a pretty high tolerance for, kind of dark stuff. I always have. I was a big Poppy Z. Bright fan in high school. Like I've read stuff that I had to put the book down because I was eating at the time. And I was like, well, I can either eat or read this book because I actually can't do both.
Right.
But then that's my personal consumption. But then when it comes to editing and books we're putting out, I'm just a lot more sensitive with how I read them. Because I'm like, well, if this is mildly off-putting to me, it might be incredibly off-putting to other people. But I think that with content warnings and with maturity warnings and things like that, I think it's totally fine to put out stuff that isn't for everybody. There might be people that aren't going to read this book or might never want to read this book because of the subjects that it deals with, and that's fine. You don't have to. I will not judge you for not reading this book,
But I've got a question before we end. I've got a question. As Dixie, you were saying about putting a book down because it got too horrifying, and a lot of the time people can remember this. So a lot of us go through our teenage years with a great big smile on our face when we're watching horror films because they just don't leave a dent. So we'll watch Tim Curry in It. We'll watch, the worst schlocky horror movies that are in Blockbuster or whatever, because for whatever reason we don't have the real sense of empathy at that point about what makes this horrific. And then we start reading books and we start seeing films that make us think, okay, that's enough. That's made me stop. So for you, Dixie, what's the movie and or novel, the first one that springs to mind that you had to take a breather on as you were making your way through?
Actually, the one I just mentioned, that would be Exquisite Corpse by Poppy Z. Bright, who goes by a different name now. He has transitioned, and I cannot think of his name. But so there's this book called Exquisite Corpse. If you were a teen in the early 2000s, late 90s, you probably read Lost Souls, Poppy Z. Bright, Drawing Blood, these books about vampires and ghosts and things set in very small town North Carolina, which as somebody that grew up in North Carolina, I was into that. And they were kind of gross sometimes. But then a book came out called Exquisite Corpse that is about a serial killer who escapes from jail, who likes to eat young men, and comes to New Orleans and proceeds on this thing. And there were a couple of descriptions in the book. I very vividly remember sitting on the edge of my bed, trying to eat a sandwich the first time I was reading the book. And at one point, I literally kind of looked at the book and looked at my sandwich and was like, well, it's one or the other right now. because there's no way I can keep reading this description of what this person is doing to these, teen boys, while eating. So I put it down, and I finished my sandwich, and I gave it like half an hour, to get in the pool, and then I came back and finished my book. But I really like all of those books, but I also realized that for a lot of people, they might not be able to even get through the first couple of chapters. I feel the same. So I just to continue this a little bit, I have a real problem with certain things in horror movies. I don't like what they call torture porn at all. I don't mind gore, but I hate torture porn. So I remember watching Hostel for the first time, for the only time, to be perfectly fair, because everybody had recommended it. It was when it was like the hot new thing. And I had a friend that lent it to me. I watched it, and I got through most of it just fine. I don't do well with vomit, and I also don't do well with eyeball horror. And both of those things happen in a very short span of time. And that is one of the few horror movies that I had to turn my head. And for the vomit specifically, I had to mute it, because if I hear that too much, I will end up doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, not okay. I will likely never watch Hostel again, but I have seen it the one time. Do you have anything like that, Eddie?
Generally kind of mildly uncomfortable with those films. And also there's films where there's a scene, Wrath of Khan in particular, really bothered me, because there's a scene where you pull a slug, or put a slug into someone's ear, or pull it out of their ear for check in particular. And of course, for my disability, that was particularly rough. There was an episode of Friday the 13th, which was all around a hearing aid, which really bugged me, because it was, at one point they pulled the hearing aid out and part of the inner ear came with it. So that really bothered me in particular, and also I think led to why I didn't have hearing aids for a very long time in my life.
I might have an ear thing too that I just don't know about, because they don't use it very often in movies. But for some reason that really grossed me out.
It is not a big thing, and yet the few times it's come up, I've always had a very strong nope.
So, where can we find you on social media, Eddie?
You can find me at just about any social media sites by typing in Eddie Fate, EDDYFATE, or you can go to my website, eddiefate.com.
And Dixie?
Same thing. Find me on just about any social media site at Dixie Cyanide. That's Dixie like my first name, Cyanide like the poison.
And you can find me on YouTube as The Gentleman Gamer, the Onyx Path Forum as The Gentleman Gamer, Twitter as Clap Click Bang, and Facebook as Matthew Norton. Many worlds, one Pathcast. Welcome.
2, 1. Oh, sorry.
Welcome to the Onyx Pathcast. We'll try this again. Well, if we keep this in, brilliant. If we don't,
oh no.
Welcome to the fucking hell.
Okay, this is definitely all going at the end now.
Yeah. All right.